Welcome, everyone. First of all, a big virtual elbow bump to everyone on the call today. We made it to Friday, which these days is no small feat. So it's been quite an upside down year for all of us, and I want to start out by thanking everyone for being with us today. Your time and attention are valuable, and so we're extremely appreciative of you spending time and attention with Derse today. And a special welcome to all of our clients on the webinar. We are so used to seeing you in person at trade shows and events, and we're glad we can at least be with you virtually today and hopefully in person sometime soon. So I am Julia Haas. I am the Director of Marketing at Derse, and we're covering a very hot topic today. It's around the future of engagement and planning for the return of live events. Todd Sussman and Pete Riddell will be your main presenters today. And Pete and Todd have decades of experience in customer engagement and design. They will have some awesome content to share with you. It's going to be real and relevant, and it's things you can implement today, as well as once in-person trade shows and events come back. They'll introduce themselves in a minute, but let's really start by covering off on some logistics. So first of all listeners are on mute. We just want to reduce the amount of background noise that there is on the webinar. You can use the question function within GoToWebinar if you do have questions for us. We are reserving time at the end of the webinar for question and answers, and we purposely set this webinar for 45 minutes so we can pad that last 15 minutes with time for questions. If we don't get to all of the questions today, we will follow up by email afterwards, probably next week since we're already at Friday afternoon. Also, we will be issuing polls throughout the presentation, so we'd love for you to participate so we can address what's most important to you and make sure our webinar is as relevant as possible. And finally, if you do need to jump off at any point, no worries. We are recording this webinar and we will send it to the registrants via email afterwards. So those are the main logistics that we wanted you to learn about today. So let's get started. So today I wanted to start off by saying collectively at Derse, we cannot wait to get back to in-person events and trade shows. And I'm sure many of you on the call can't either. However, this time away from trade shows and events has allowed our team to take a step back and really think about our true purpose for our clients. And that's really about helping them build connections and also helping their brands tell their stories as engagingly as possible, no matter the platform. You know, physically, I think the way we connect has changed, but emotionally it really hasn't. And so I thought I'd bring it up that in one of our recent team meetings, Pete invited us to, as a team, share what's inspiring us. And I'll have to say, as we went around and talked about how we get inspired during difficult times, it was wonderful and inspiring. So I wanted to start out today by asking Pete what's inspiring him during these crazy and interesting times.
Thanks, Julia. So this is literally one of my favorite questions at any moment in time. And one of my encouragements to everyone who is tuning in is to find time in your week to not just consider this yourself, but to also ask your peers, your colleagues, your teams. I make a point to do it every week. I am always nourished by the responses. So create space to let people share what moves them. To me, that's timeless, and that's also a good recipe for great experiences. So just for me, humbly, for me, what's inspiring me, it's a little bit of a daisy chain. And so the way I begin my mornings every day of the week is I tune in to my favorite radio station. It's KCSM, the Bay Area's jazz station, and I tune in specifically for a program. It's called Morning Cup of Jazz with Elisa Clancy, amazing, amazing person and DJ. And she starts her program every day the exact same way. She plays Billie Holiday's I Hear Music, and it's this nice little moment of Zen. So that in and of itself is inspiring, but what that does is it makes me think of my dad. My dad was a trumpet player, and he lived to be 87 years old. And into his mid 80s, he was still pushing air through his horn. And he's the handsome guy there in the center. I think he was 17 when this awesome photo was taken. And one of the things that my dad prided himself on always, even into his mid 80s, is that he never played the same solo twice. And to me, that inspires me, because what is the moment that we're in at this time? To me, it's a great improvisation. And then what does it call on us to do, especially those of us who have staked our professional career on the belief, on the power, on the promise of live in-person experiences? It's calling us to play some jazz, right? It's calling us to take stock of the information around us. It's inspiring us to listen to the talented players that we get to work and share a stage with. So thank you, Todd. Thank you, Julia. And it's listening to their ideas and building on them with your own ideas, and then drawing on your experience and your instincts and your influences to take action. And and as the ideas change, as the information changes, we're improvising, and that's only inspiring new ideas. So to me, the lesson there is not to be perfect, but if you're doing it right, we're going to find ourselves playing a solo that we've never played before. So to me, that's absolutely inspiring. And as a old trumpet player taught me many years ago, that's how you know you're doing it right. So to my colleagues who are joining us today, I just say welcome to the Great Improvisation. I know personally, and on behalf of the team, we are so grateful for the dialogues and the discourse that we've been hosting with our clients. We are so grateful to hear your ideas, to be able to share our own, and to take action together. And that's what's inspiring me. Oh, related but unrelated. Something else that's inspired me recently is the social distancing skunk ape from Gatorland in Orlando. YouTube it if you've not gotten the chance. It's brilliantly ridiculous, but actually we'll talk about that in a minute. So Julia, I'll pass it back to you.
I always love hearing how you're inspired, Pete. Thank you so much. So the inspiration part is essential, I think, to getting started, right? And thinking through improvisation, I think it's great to set up some context that you're going to give to us, because I think inspiration is a great place to start, but then how do we move forward from here? How do we take that first step in improvisation? Can you add a little context there, Pete, for the people that are listening today?
Oh, absolutely. So I'll begin with what I'll call kind of the asterisk in the room. I think this is absolutely a positive. As we're anticipating and as we're prepping and planning for the return of in-person events, the good news is we're going to get a lot of cues from the top down. Decisions that are being made at the state level, decisions that are being made at the convention center level, certainly decisions being made at the association level. So the good news is we're going to get a good set of executional guardrails, but I think there's enough information available for us to start to think about how we can take action right now in prepping and planning for that. Also, too, I wanted to just thank all of those who submitted questions in advance. We're going to try and season a couple of them in here today, and then we'll follow up offline. But one of the great questions that's a perfect segue is from Becky. Are decisions in major sports and openings like Disney World a major indicator in what will happen in the event industry? And our take on it is, in terms of being an indicator, absolutely. Whether a major indicator, I think that's TBD. But I think it's definitely appropriate to keep an eye on the decisions that Disney World and entities are making, because they're making decisions about how to manage large gatherings, right? And there's never a bad moment to take cues from kind of Disney World in terms of operational excellence, and also balancing that with the customer, the consumer experience. So the other thing I want to encourage, though, is that as we, as consumers, in our own neighborhoods, in our own communities, start to re-engage with our experiences at a really local level, we're going to get good cues, because we're going to approach it from kind of a consumer mindset. We're going to get a sense of what works well, what feels good, and what is striking that appropriate balance. Just as an example, my wife mentioned earlier this week that our church is actually going to a reservation system, which is, when you think about it, is an absolutely radical thought. So we're curious to see how well that works. So again, I think the good news is we're going to have a lot of opportunity to be sponges in the days and the weeks and even the months ahead. And again, as Julia intimated, the thing that we will also want to reinforce is that while we're trying to be sensitive as experienced designers to the circumstances as they evolve, the fundamental mission never changes. And that is, how can you tell your best stories as engagingly as possible? What is maybe evolving are the parameters that will influence how you do that, but the mission is always unchangeable.
All right, we're going to jump into our first poll question. So we'll take about, I'll read through this, and then we'll take about 30 seconds or so to be able to answer the question. So what's the biggest challenge or opportunity facing you and your exhibit/event teams?
So possible answers: doing more with less, budgets and team, evolving my exhibit or event experience, perhaps travel restrictions, both maybe internal but even external, or the impact that the circumstances have had on your industry, or the pivot to virtual. As we'll take about 30 seconds to allow you to weigh in. As we've been hosting dozens of dialogues with all of our clients, we found that there is no right, or there's no specific answer. Every client is kind of approaching their opportunities and challenges through a completely different lens. So we're curious to see your takes on this.
Hey, Pete and Todd, I'm going to drop off now and let you drop your amazing knowledge for the presentation, and I'll be back at the end to talk about some logistics and answer and queue up some questions for you guys at the end. Sound good?
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Julia.
Thanks.
Interesting. So this is actually very consistent with the dialogues that we've been hosting, and we probably did you a disservice by just allowing you to choose one, because I'm sure that all of these are relevant in some measure. But the pivot to virtual is definitely front and center with a lot of our clients. We'll be touching on that at the end of the session. Very good. So so with that, then we wanted to get into the good stuff. So the big questions that we have and we want to dive into today, and really at a broad level, and our ambition here is to see deeper dialogue moving forward, but these are the questions we want to get on the table. How can we prepare now and start to plan for the future of in-person events? How can we also craft experiences that are intuitive and also put audiences at ease? The third question I wanted to just mention for a second: how do we evolve to contact less engagement? I've been saying consistently that if we just dive back here for a moment, that we've been getting wiser week by week, and I'm confident that that will continue. We added a hyphen to this because even the CDC guidelines, as they've been getting more consistent and redundant, we're starting to appreciate the idea of contact and surfaces may not be as much of a transmissible notion as it was perhaps we thought weeks ago. So I don't think it's eliminating contact. I think it's just a question of, are there opportunities to limit that in some way? And then the last 2 points: how do we leverage technology? How can we to remove friction? And then I think a big question is, what role will staff play in all of this? And kind of our guiding light for this session, and really in the evolving dialogues we're hosting with our clients, is the premise is making your audiences feel comfortable engaging with your people, your space, and your stories. And that notion of comfortable, that's not a one-size-fits-all notion. Every person on this call, regardless of your company and your circumstances in your industry, you're going to know your audiences really, really well, and you're going to know what steps you need to take to make them feel comfortable. And when we say comfortable, we're not talking specifically safe and healthy. The idea is, how are you caring for not just the health of your audiences, but their time, their curiosity, and their attention? And the other thing I want to point out is, this is not a new question. This is not a new notion. This topic, this thesis is as relevant today as it was months ago, and as relevant as what will be months and even years moving forward. The parameters in which we consider this answer is what's evolving, how we go about it. But making your audiences feel comfortable is job one. And really, we wanted to start with just a quick word about people. Every experience that you design should be people first. So that's both your people and that's also the human beings that you're looking to engage. Was in a dialogue with a client literally this week, and he put it exquisitely. He said, moving forward, he said, comfort is going to be king when it comes to experience design. And again, how you go about achieving that is going to be absolutely different based on the audiences you're trying to engage and when and where you are engaging them. But our encouragement is to make attendee comfort your default. And what we mean by that is think about it from the perspective of, if your audience has to process and think and kind of figure out how to engage with you, what they're supposed to do, what they're not supposed to do, where they're supposed to go. Each one of those considerations is a barrier between whatever their interest is and the experience you want to offer. So you want to provide as many cues as possible to them so that they feel comfortable engaging. And again, depending on when the event in question is going to be going live, the balance is going to be different. If you're planning for events that are going to take place yet this fall, the situation and circumstances are going to be one way. If we're talking something into 2021, obviously the landscape's going to be different. So our encouragement is, wherever that is taking place, just try to balance the consideration of your audience with still preserving a very human interaction. So our essential takeaways for this notion is, and these are topics that Todd's going to talk about once we get into the environment side of this and how you start to think about your environments, is consider reassurance protocols. You want to be very overt and transparent in the cues to let your audiences know how to successfully engage with you. And then also put yourself in your audience's shoes. What are the millions of things that might be going through their mind? And as I said, as we as consumers start to engage in our audience, be very mindful of kind of your mindset as a visitor, as a consumer, and the things that make you more or less comfortable. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Todd to talk about environments and how we can start thinking about planning and prepping those.
All right, perfect. Yeah, taking the baton from Pete, as he had spoken about the people, we're really going to focus on, how to have your audiences feel comfortable engaging with the physical space. So this is really about space. But first, we're going to jump into the second polling question. What aspects of your exhibit program do you anticipate having to evolve when in-person events return?
So, and again, you can select one or more of these. Might be presentation theaters, demonstrations, giveaways, conference rooms, or hospitality. So take a few seconds there. We'll take about 30 seconds, let you weigh in on all the ones that apply to you. Okay.
All right, let's see what we've got.
Ooh.
Ooh, yeah, demos, winning by a nose. So yeah, there's yeah, and we'll touch on, some of these, within the upcoming segments, but it seems like, there's a real mixed bag here, right? So, we figure that talking about the space is going to be really important for people and how they engage and interact. So first and foremost, what I would say is, we can advance, we really want to go ahead and make health and safety a top priority, right? I mean, we're hearing that, all over, and that is priority number one. So as we plan for the return of live events, and I think that we're all hopeful that it'll come sooner than later, show organizers, convention centers, general contractors, they're going to be promoting, how to plan on assessing or addressing health and safety for all the attendees, right? So Pete talked about like the state level, right? So that's kind of the macro. But that doesn't mean that, we shouldn't be looking at how we're going to be addressing things, at the micro level, at the local level. So we'll talk about, how to promote some of these practices, at the local level. And, first and foremost, what I would say coming out of that, advance here, is, put reassurance protocols in place. And, that's for, not only the attendees, but also your staff. And really what that means is be obvious in the way that you're demonstrating, the hygiene practices within your environment. And I know that these are going to seem like it's low-hanging fruit, but this is definitely a different time and space that we're in right now. So, the first thing is, place hand sanitizing stations, at multiple points throughout the space. You're going to see these, from, every aspect, from the time that you leave your house to the time you arrive, at the convention center, but we can actually pull that all the way through and be obvious in the way that we're demonstrating things and bring that actually into your exhibit environment. Frequently clean and sanitize the common areas in the space, right? So, at times we're really looking at the cleaning of the exhibit environments. It's more of an out of sight, out of mind scenario, right? So a lot of what you're doing is, contracting people to come in the middle of the night, clean when you show up in the morning, everything is, fresh and new for the day. That practice is really going to go ahead and change, I think in at least the near term. So we want to be incredibly obvious in the way that we're cleaning, and sanitizing, your booth spaces. So, that's something we really need to consider. But moving on, from that, we want to take you into considerations in how hygiene practices are considered for the physical space. And let me just say that we're not necessarily being prescriptive. As Pete mentioned, we're learning new things every day. These are just merely suggestions, that may or may not be relative to your or relevant to your program right now or moving in the future. Again, just suggestions. But as we think about that, we may want to rethink material selection, first and foremost there, and the treatment of surfaces. So, utilizing smooth, non-porous materials on walls and counter surfaces, it may not necessarily be the sexiest thing to do. We know that, chunky textures and whatnot are very on trend. Well, in the near term, we may want to pull that back a little bit, bringing forward just these smooth materials like laminates, acrylics, things of that nature that are very, very easy to clean. We might want to consider using vinyl flooring material. So vinyl flooring material, while it may have a different price point than carpet, is going to be much easier to clean. And these are the types of things that will resonate, with the attendees because they're used to seeing this type of flooring in sterile situations like doctors' offices and hospitals. So, as we're being obvious again in how we're cleaning surfaces, bringing vinyl flooring material instead of carpeting into the space, might be the way to go. And then, as you look at furniture within the space, and you wouldn't think that this was really a significant thing, but, maybe look for leather or vinyl wrapped furniture versus, utilizing fabrics, within furniture. Because again, we're going to want to be really obvious in the way that we're wiping down surfaces. Leather and vinyl wrapped furniture are going to be much better overall within the space in terms of, hygiene and keeping things clean. And then staying buzzword compliant for the day, right? We want to go ahead and promote physical distancing. And what does that mean for the booth space proper, right? So how can we actually bring that into the physical environment? Well, we can go ahead and create an open floor plan. And really what we want to do is emphasize attendee comfort. As Pete mentioned earlier, comfort is king. So we can do that in a number of different ways. We can manage the amount of staff and attendees that are actually promoting, social distancing and safety, right? So, from that standpoint, I think that there's going to be a general rule, and at least in the short term, that shows and conferences are going to be limiting the number of people in attendance, right? So shows that may have had 30, 40, 50,000 attendees are going to be scaling back, right? And I think that this is really going to make the practice of social distancing that much easier, while still being able to focus on the quality of the engagement, over the quantity of attendees, right? So it's not necessarily just how many people are there, but the quality of the engagements in the space. And then you may want to go ahead and rethink furniture layouts, as well. So potentially replacing things like couches and ottomans, for individual chairs and maybe club seating in lounges and theater areas. This is going to go ahead and optimize the space for presentation and conversation, but it's also going to help you adhere to social distancing guidelines. And then manage the use of enclosed spaces. This is one where attendees are going to be less likely to want to gather in confined spaces. However, we know that conference rooms are sometimes a necessity. So when a conference space is necessary, we may want to look at limiting capacity and potentially removing some of the seating within the overall space. We can also look at things like adding air purification, to the space as well. So where we can scrub the air to remove the particulates. So these are things that, are really going to emphasize the health and safety, not only for the attendees, but again, your staff as well. And then one of the last things that we'll talk about here too is, obviously if we're talking about, physical distancing, space planning is really important. So maybe we look at conserving space while creating natural barriers between attendees. And an example of this, and it was kind of a highlight in what you had spoken about in your poll question, is demo stations. Maybe we look for back-to-back demo stations, which can really conserve space within an overall plan, but also, be respectful to the physical distancing as we're putting a barrier, in between groups of people. So there's a lot of things that we can do to really, emphasize attendee comfort. Now that we've talked about, the physical space, right, the space plan, we want to invite the attendees to, engage in the space. And one of the ways that we can actually approach this is by controlling access into that space, sequencing the flow of how we bring the attendees, into our environment and how they navigate. So, how do we show them the way? Consider crafting a customer journey to be able to guide the attendees, right? So, utilizing directional signage with a mix of subtle and obvious cues. They can guide attendees along a desired path. I think in the past, we've gone ahead and tried to use as many subtle cues as possible. Now I think we want to be a little bit more obvious with that. Control the entry points and consider using a one-way traffic flow. So we may look at scenarios where we're walling off one, maybe two sides of the exhibit space, of course, if the association allows for that. But that's really going to allow us to be able to control the ingress and egress, of your space, thus creating, a nice traffic flow in and around the space. We can go ahead and use flooring inlays to help the attendees navigate the space. So flooring inlays, used as navigational tools are becoming much more common, right? We're seeing them in essential businesses that we interact with, they say on a weekly basis, in things like big box stores and grocery stores. But, we can also use those to our advantage within the overall space. Now that people are actually looking down at that ground level to reinforce marketing messaging where maybe we haven't done that before. And then lastly, consider pre-scheduled appointments and offer exclusive access, right? So, this is going to make the attendee feel like it's a higher level of engagement, and it's also going to be able to control the flow of attendees in and out of the space. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in a moment. So essential takeaways, again, from a high level perspective, we're really trying to prioritize the health and well-being of staff and attendees. Again, that's priority number one. We want to make them feel comfortable within the space. Again, to borrow Pete's phrase, comfort is king. And then we want to create a flow that's going to elevate the attendee experience. And when we talk about the experience, I'll pass it back over to Pete to talk about the stories that are being told.
Thanks, Todd. So we're going to tee this up with our third poll question.
All right.
And perfect. Oh, go ahead. Oh, sorry.
Do you anticipate having to evolve your digital content experiences in preparation for the return of in-person events?
So as you consider this, Definitely are you anticipating? Definitely not. Maybe in some cases, or not sure. We have clients that are already thinking way down the field on this. We have clients who are slaying other dragons presently who haven't even had the moments to think about this. So we kind of welcome your perspective on this. We've also had very spirited discussion internally as well on this topic. Interesting. So I'll say this aligns with our hunches and is consistent with the kinds of conversations that we've been hosting. Just interesting to point out that there's 3% that are certain, that definitely not. And again, I think all of these questions kind of point out that there's no one size fits all. We've been saying internally, if you talked with one client, you pretty much talked with one client. Everyone has a different lens, is operating in a different set of guidelines. But for this last section, so we wanted to just kind of consider some things to think about envisioning a contact-less world. And really the lens that we invite everyone here to consider is there opportunity to innovate the customer experience? Is there an opportunity to improve the customer experience, to remove friction, to make it more seamless? So again, like this isn't hyper focusing on solving a social distancing impacted question. It's really just saying, how can we deliver a better customer experience? And a reoccurring phrase that we've been leaning hard into is like, this is the moment to try new things, right? And so one of the big bets that we are pondering is the idea of, before you reinvent the wheel, maybe we start with the answer that's already in all of our pockets. Like, this is a device that all of your attendees already implicitly trust. They may not be able to trust all the content that is in this device, but they can trust this device. They're comfortable with it, right? So questions, reasonable questions to ask is, how can attendees use the device that they're most comfortable with to engage spaces and environments? And we're going to start real simply, but then we're going to kind of unpack it a bit more to just kind of mine different possibilities. So at its simplest, simply inviting attendees to scan a code that directs them to a destination, whether it's content driven or otherwise, that's seamless, that's frictionless. And building out from there, the idea is their destination, think of it as a responsive website, not asking attendees to download an app. I just want to be clear on that. That's that's obviously a bit of friction that I know personally as a consumer, that's not anything I'm interested in for kind of a momentary interaction. So the idea of scanning, and just as a quick exercise, so for those of you who have your smartphones handy, turn on your camera and go ahead and hold it up to the code here. And what we have is, you're able to download our new Now What ebook. And a lot of smart devices have this natively built in. You don't have to open an app. You don't have to download special software. You're just naturally able to do that through your camera vision. For those of you who are not able to do that, don't worry. We're still going to make this available to you after the fact. But something like that, you're driving with your own device and you're accessing content. You have the choice of whether or not it's valuable to you or not. And while you have your cameras out, if you're curious, you can link to the social distancing skunk ape. I would just say you don't have to watch it right now. It'll keep, trust me. But what I would say is that don't consider it mindless distraction. I would say consider it research. And I mean that sincerely. And the example that I wanted to highlight actually from that is this, is that we talk about the notion of what does it take to make your audiences comfortable engaging with your people, your space, and your content. And depending on the circumstance and the situation, it's a question of, are you seeking, or are your audience seeking, a transaction or an interaction in that live experience? And I'll use two extreme examples here to highlight that contrast. My wife went to the doctor this week, first time she was back in a doctor's office in months. and it was rigidly managed from the moment that you walked in. It was clear that you were not going to get in without a mask. When you went in, there was a very strict protocol on where to go, what to do, where to sit. You were not to move unless you were asked to move. And that is absolutely appropriate for that kind of environment. But think of the emotional state of the individual. My wife was worried about, like, am I doing the right thing? Am I going to get in trouble? I'm pointing out that that's absolutely appropriate for the seriousness of a doctor's office, where you may be in contact with people whose health is compromised in some way. I want to contrast that with Gatorland in Orlando, which I hope to visit someday. Their approach was very different. They are there to communicate that there are safety protocols in place, but the way that they communicate that is specifically aimed at putting their audiences at ease and letting them know you're going to have a great time here. Here's what you need to be aware of, but you're going to have a lot of fun. And it was absolutely appropriate. They acted in a way that put their customers at ease and made them comfortable to engage. So again, no one size fits all. Think of your audience, think of what's on their mind and what they're weighing, but there's opportunity to consider how to do that and deliver still kind of a memorable, relevant experience. So moving on then. So we want to unpack some things to think about. So this concept of bring your own device, BYOD is what we're calling it. There is virtually no limit to the types of experiences that you can enable to allow attendees to drive, not just to stay within their device, but to also engage with a physical space. So we talked about, downloading content. That's easy, that's straightforward. You have content, scan, access it, download it, done. You can also reward attendees via their own device, whether that's virtual loot bags, digital incentives, coupons. We have clients who, depending on the industry, may have show specials. So you can reward the audience for their time and attention via their device as well. You can invite them to have a little brandable micro moment. So maybe a little brand gamification exercise that could still connect with the larger space. So maybe they're engaging with something here, and then there could be a leaderboard in the booth where they get to see how they compare and contrast with their peers. You could also use it for polling or allow attendees to make a choice, right? And again, that could be played back. That could have an impact on an engageable space in the environment as well, all from the comfort of their own device. We have a lot of clients that do a lot of things like historically, like signature walls, or ways to memorialize the attendees' presence or participation. Help us support insert organization here. Thank you for your participation in honor of your presence. So there's ways that they can participate via their phone that is addressed communally in the space, so they still feel connected to you and connected to the space. Another really cool thing is that you can allow attendees to actually impact things in the physical space. It's essentially input and output. So the example that we're showing in the bottom right is, it was a multiple choice question, and each answer corresponded to a color. Attendees made their choice, and this was like, I believe the question was something like, what is your wish for the future of neuroscience? So they made their selection, corresponded to a color-coded ball, and then the ball triggered and went on a journey before it was collected in a bin. And again, like, that's taking what would otherwise be a transaction, make a choice, and then delivering something mesmerizing and or magical as a result. So again, the idea of triggering physical reactions is also something. You can do photo activations from your own phone. You can do filters, you can do frames, you can do branded content via this responsive website concept that could still be played back in a gallery. You could still incentivize folks to share. We have a lot of clients who've done like digital mosaics. All of that can be triggered from an attendee's own device. And last but not least, you could also trigger something to react or dispense in a very contactless way. We've been brainstorming with clients who are in the food service industry, for whom sampling has historically been a key part of their experience. So we're brainstorming, well, how can you preserve that, but enable it in a contact-less way as well. So again, so the point is do not underestimate the power and the possibility of interactions that let the attendees drive with their own device. Two other things that we want to mention in brief here is the idea of if, depending on your space and your spatial parameters, you're in a big space, a smaller space, still encourage folks to think big. And what we mean by that is, can you communicate at scale to larger audiences, right? Can you reach larger audiences with bigger gestures? So this is just an activation that we had done that would be very conducive, I think, to the circumstances moving forward. The idea of a floor-triggered interaction that then inspires a grand digital gesture. It arrests attention, it communicates to a group that can be spread out and dispersed. And it doesn't have to be as involved as what we're showing here, but the idea of a very simple trigger to trigger kind of a big demonstration or explanation. We had a lot of clients who were interested in how do we rethink demos. Supersizing may be a way to think about it. The last point we want to touch on under this topic is we have a lot of clients who, if events and when events, even if there are fall events later this year, companies and our clients have already predetermined that they're still going to be under travel restrictions. So the fundamental question is if there is an industry event happening and we can't send the individuals that we've historically sent, our leaders, our stakeholders, our executives, we might only be able to staff maybe at a regional level. Are there still opportunities to kind of like give that executive or senior level or senior stakeholder presence? So there's scalable options for sure. But if you're looking to make a moment of something like that, if you have an important thought leader or something that you want to virtually present at a conference, there are ways to do that. The example that we're showing on screen, many of you are probably familiar. It's the portal system. And what this is this is the evolution of the concept of real-time streaming holograms. And the demonstration here, while it's showing kind of a co-located space where the person, the physical person, is in the same room, the concept and the application is the person who is on the white screen can be in one location and the system, the unit, can be in another state, essentially, right? So it's be anywhere, beam anywhere. These are commercially available. They're obviously, there's an expense involved, but at the same time, aside from technical considerations, making sure you have a sufficient production set where it's streamed from, and then provisions where it's streaming to, it's absolutely relevant and appropriate for a live event setting. This last example, I'm going to fully confess here, is I always say, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So as an experienced designer, we're always conditioned to think about, okay, how can you elevate a moment beyond the ordinary? So if hopefully we've at least held your attention with our rectangular boxes and our talking heads, but I'm also open to the possibility that in and of itself, this interaction is not magical. I want to suggest that you don't have to be content with this kind of interaction in a streaming circumstance. The example here is actually one from a few years ago. It has some dust on it, and it's from some good friends of ours up in Canada, Mark Stewart and his merry band of technologists. And it was a mall activation from Mattel. Had an individual who was off premises, who's in the screen, and then engaged with real-time visitors at the mall. And because it was Mattel, it was a Pictionary activation. So the individual who's streaming is not speaking, but is listening and hearing everything, and is playing Pictionary with live people in another location. Pictionary, eminently conducive to this kind of interaction. And what struck me is the idea is that what you draw could be anything. It could be your marketing message. It could be anything. It was a delightfully timed interaction. When folks actually won and guessed it, there was actually a little bit of a ludicrous mode celebratory moment, which was a nice bit of business. But the fundamental premise is, when you're thinking about streaming in individuals, it doesn't have to be just the talking head. I would always encourage the question of how can we elevate this beyond the ordinary? So when we're thinking about, is there an opportunity to remove friction? Maybe a little bit less contact. And again, we're not here to prescribe any of these. We're just putting them on the table. Are these things that could improve an attendee's experience? How can you remove friction? Is it bring your own device? Is it perhaps the use of gesture? Is it big gesture? Is it telling stories in a large way that reaches a lot of audiences at one time? So we want to zoom out, pun regretted in this moment. There's a few questions we got in advance, and it was any insights on virtual shows, and there was a great question, so thank you, Sarah. And then are virtual events going to take over in-person events from Kelly? And again, we were grateful for the questions because we were planning to at least broach this topic on this session anyway. And here's our hunch. Well, and actually it's not a hunch. I think this is what we're evangelizing. This is consistent with the dialogues that we're evolving with our clients is it's not an either or question. It's a yes and question, because I think there's been an aha moment as we have participated in experiences pivoting to virtual. And the aha moment is the appreciation of the distinction between reach and impact. Digital experiences are fantastic for reach. You're always going to reach a larger audience than you would in an in real life experience, and that's always been the case. That is not a new discovery. But I think what we're seeing proved is as conferences are pivoting to virtual, the single metric that all of them are dropping out is attendance is larger than it's ever been, and that's true, and that's important. But reach is not the same thing as impact. There's a great quote from a former editor of Fast Company who said reach is not the same thing as impact. To achieve impact, you really have to get face to face, right? There are things you can only accomplish when you're physically present with other individuals. And as we know, as folks who have lived in the live event space, the interactions happen in the moment, and also it's the in-between interactions, the interactions that happen after events in hallways and things like that. So there will never be a substitute for the impact that is yielded there. So how are we advising clients, working with clients, and collaborating with clients to take action now? We're really taking it from a three-step perspective. The first one is, how can you captivate the at-home audiences today, right? As things have pivoted to digital and virtual experiences, how can you tell your best stories as engagingly as possible in this moment, while planning for a scaled, strategic, and safe return to face-to-face? And then moving forward, how are you modeling a hybrid engagement strategy for the weeks, months, and years to come? So even when in real life events return, I think we've seen enough to know that complementing that with a digital and a virtual strategy is optimizing not just your impact, but also your reach as well. And the way that we're cohering that to help our clients get their heads around it and to work with them about how best to take action is a concept we're calling the infinity loop. And at the center of that infinity loop, as you see, is the return of live events. Everyone who is gathered here today, that is the common denominator that unites us all, the ultimate return of live events. But yes, and I think the fundamental opportunity is, how can you build out a larger experiential playbook so that you can optimize reach and impact? And again, there's no one size fits all. Depending on the type of experiences you want to host with the specific audiences you're trying to engage, there's a lot of different tools in the toolbox that we can work with clients to activate to help you maximize that opportunity. So more to come on that moving forward. But again, just to quickly sum up, our message here is there is action that everyone on this call can take right now, right in this moment. And just to summarize a few of them, from a staff standpoint, start to give thought to, do we need to upskill staff? Do we need to train staff to optimize the guest experience? Again, maybe we're anticipating that only regional representatives might be able to staff. Well, you might be putting more on their shoulders to optimize that. So start thinking about that now. From a spatial standpoint, for all the things that Todd put on the table, we're calling it a home inspection, and we're meeting with our clients and our design teams and conducting a home inspection of your environment and your properties as they exist right now. And it's just saying, what are the areas of opportunity that we might need to think about evolving here, right? That's a conversation that can start right this moment. From an engagement standpoint, it may not be recreating the wheel, but this is the moment to ask, how can we improve our customer experience? How can we remove friction from it? And then last but not least, as we thoughtfully plan and prepare for the return of in real life, in-person events, how can we start to maximize our reach by allowing remote audiences to engage virtually and digitally to complement the ultimate return of in real life experiences moving forward as well? So that brings us at least to the end of this, I'll say, verse of the great improvisation. Again, everything that we have shared today is the fruit of inspired dialogue and sharing of ideas with our clients, bouncing ideas, bouncing possibilities, listening to what's going on around us. We encourage the evolution of that dialogue, and we look forward to diving even deeper with our clients moving forward as we continue to adapt and improvise. So Julia, back to you.
Pete, Todd, thanks. You guys are awesome. Thanks for giving us both strategic ideas as well as very tactical and applicable real ideas to implement today and in the future. So thank you so much. Right now we're pretty close on time. So we have time for probably one question. So I thought I'd throw this one out to you guys. And then we'll end with just some final logistics on what the webinar attendees can expect next. So I'm going to read off this question. The question is, are there any guidelines from the World Health Organization, state or country levels regarding how many staff and attendees are going to be allowed in, say, a 10 by 10 or an 80 by 80 exhibit? So I think the question is, who's setting those precedents for specific amount of people, whether it's at an event or within a specific size space? Is it going to be the event organizers who are going to pull from the CDC and all of the different governing bodies that are setting those guidelines? What do you guys think in terms of, as things go live again, who's going to be setting the stage for expectations?
So, I mean, Todd, do you want to take that? I mean, I can jump in real quick.
No, why don't you start it out and then I'll kind of put a bow on it.
So I think it's going to be a top-down, right? I mean, obviously, everyone at the association and convention center level is going to be taking cues from a state level. But even early indicators that we've seen is like your associations are obviously going to be your most pure guiding light, because each association may have a different take on it. So as an example, we're aware of a show in the healthcare space that has not given specifics, but has also hinted that, hey, exhibitors will need to submit their plans and their floor plans in advance for evaluation. So historically, for some industries, that's meant sight lines and see-throughs and setbacks, but moving forward, it's going to be through the lens of whatever their parameters are for what's gonna be an acceptable way to show up on a show floor. So again, I think I'm not aware of very specific guidelines that are universal, but again, I think the associations are going to take cues from states and convention centers.
Right.
Yeah, and I haven't seen any guidelines that are very specific either. I know, like at the convention center level, they're working to essentially achieve certification in cleanliness to basically welcome people back and attendees back and shows back. So that's something that they're driving at, but again, that's through certification at the state level as well. As we bring attendees back into the space, we just saw the Consumer Electronics Show talk about the other day there was an announcement that they were going to have a physical show as well. I'll be really interested to see an organization that is that large what guidance they come out with. So again, their first piece was to announce we are doing a physical show, but they put caveats on what that would actually be. So we'll see, kind of that unfold in front of us. So as we talked about sporting events in Disney World on the front end of the meeting, I would probably look to a show like CES, one of the largest, at least, if not the largest outside of a con expo in the US, in the States. They will probably give pretty good guidance as to what that means to exhibit successfully, safely, in North America.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And we can also follow up with the person that asked it too, if they have any other questions. That's great. We're pretty close to the end of time, so we'll table any additional questions. We'll answer those by email following this webinar. If we can just, I'm going to advance us to this end slide. First of all, just thank you so much, everyone on the call and the webinar for your time and attention today. We loved having you. It was so fun to get to do this today. So thanks so much. I'm sure Pete and Todd feel the same way. It's been very exciting for us to get ready for this. Like I mentioned, the recording of this webinar will be sent through email, so expect to see that. And then we'll try and also include the link to the ebook and the video that Pete gave with the social distancing skunk. I think that's what it was. So we'll try to in our follow-up email. Following this, when we close out, there'll be a survey after, and we'd love to hear from you. And there'll be a question. We'd like to know what topics you'd like to hear about next, because we'll be doing some additional webinars in the near future. So we'd love to hear from you on what you want to hear about. If you have questions specifically for us, you can email us at insights@derse.com. We will, I get those emails and then we pass them along to our experts internally so we can answer them directly. There's more resources at derse.com that you can check out. We have a blog and lots of case studies and lots of information for you to inspire you and inform you. And like I said, keep a lookout for future webinars and virtual events. They're coming soon. If you want to sign up for our newsletter, it's called Derse Direct, and we will email you with those updates as they happen. So thanks again to everyone that's joined us. We really appreciate it. Stay safe, stay connected, and we will see you soon. Thanks, guys.